Hey everyone. So yeah, here it is, my first anime review of in a long ass while, and yeah, I'm choosing to cover the beginning at the end anime as for anime to start. Now, just I guess a quick synopsis of the beginning after the end. The whole story of it is that a king from a more futuristic era, a slightly more futuristic era, I guess you could say, called King Gray. He basically dies and gets reborn as a baby into a more into a world of a more medieval variety. Now, obviously, just from that brief synopsis, a lot of people are going to draw comparisons to another show like this, another series like this that everyone recognizes, Mushoku Tensei, and I'll be honest, getting much more personal to people here. This series, beginning at the end, it was my Mushoku Tensei. Like I didn't really get into Mushoku Tensei until after I started reading this, and this was my Mushoku Tensei. This was the series I started reading and really got me into what this whole like isekai, and really this was the series that really showed me what the isekai genre can really do. So when an anime was released, I was excited. Now of course when I heard more details coming out, that's where I started to get concerned, and and I'll be honest, after watching this episode, my thoughts are complicated, frankly, to say the least. They're good. Like this review, my thoughts are going to be all over the fucking place, frankly. But just ripping the Band-Aid off, off the two major concerns people had going into this series, specifically the anime, were art style and animation. And I want to start with art style because this was the one where, going into the series, I kept my expectations the most measured compared to everyone else, because realistically, unless you got someone like Fuyuki himself on board to do the character designs, this was the one thing that was never going to meet expectations, regardless of who they got. No matter how good the artist was, it was always going to fall short from Fuyuki's art style. That was always going to be the case. So looking at it from that perspective, and after having watched this episode, I can say I don't hate the character designs. But the thing is, the character designs do have a very streamlined anime look to them, which, after having watched the episode, I think I know why that's the case. But my critique boils down to the art and character designs could have been a touch more stylized. They're fine as they are, but definitely could use a touch more detail. In saying that, though, let's talk animation, because this is where I'm likely going to get a lot of blowback no matter what I say. But in truth, this episode didn't give me a whole lot to work with, since it really is just the introduction of the series, introducing us to Arthur, the world, his parents, his new parents, basically, and the magic and the whole magic system as well. But from the standout bits and pieces I gleaned from this episode, the animation is kind of a mixed bag at best, and like it's kind of complicated to talk about for me. But I'm prepared for what I'm about to say to blow up in my face. But I think what they're trying to do here, and what ACAST specifically is trying to do here, is sacrifice character designs for animation. Because by simplifying the character designs, I think it'll allow them to a better amount of flow with how they construct with how they animate scenes and whatnot. But in saying that, though, this episode wasn't really a good first impression of that either, because the animation for the most in this episode was definitely a little rough around the edges, as despite getting the general flow from scene to scene, from the general flow of the animation down, two major problems I noticed right away from watching the episode is there were moments from the webcomic where characters are really facially expressive, but are less so here, and you can still clearly tell where they basically cut corners, as there are a few moments where they just took still images of the scenes from the comic and just plastered them onto the into the timeline when they went into editing. Now, but so in saying that though, I actually really want to get into something that really did bother me, even more than the art and animation though, which is the prologue of the episode, where it shows Arthur's, where it shows Arthur's life before resurrecting as a baby and his life as King Grey. But for those uninitiated or who haven't read the webcomic and are just coming into this just purely from the anime, this is the first major departure from the source material, and the anime as in the webcomic, we're introduced to Arthur on his I'll show you. We're introduced to Arthur on his deathbed in his final moments, and his thoughts before dying, like none of this was basically in the episode. None of what the anime showed before the scene of him waking up as a baby was in the web. None of what the anime showed before the scene of him waking up as a baby was in the webcomic. And truthfully, even more than art and animation scuffs, this was the biggest drop ball of the episode, because I think I get the idea of what the anime was trying to do and go for like a show don't tell thing. This is one time where Tell actually kind of wins the argument, simply because, at least from my interpretation and my perspective, the opening moments of the webcomic, seeing Arthur's final moments before death and getting reincarnated, shows so much of his mortality and allow us to kind of almost instantly connect with the humanity of the character beneath the facade of being the supposed tyrant king, almost instantly. Whereas the anime's prologue, in theory, should work, but it feels like I learned less about Arthur through the anime's prologue than I pretty much did from basically what the webcomic showed me. Well, with that said, though, the rest of this episode, the rest of the episode, for the most part, adapts everything pretty much on point from the webcomic, with the only notable thing is that it kind of switches the order of events around a bit. For example, we get a bit of an earlier introduction to how magic works in the anime, and although there were still some bits from the webcomic that were cut out, they still largely kept a lot of the scenes of Arthur adapting to his new life as an infant and learning about the new world he lives in. Like ACAT, to little of their credit, thankfully didn't rush past those aspects as much as I thought they would. Now, admittedly though, these are also the parts you could make the argument where the story in general gets a little bit front-loaded, whether talking about the anime or the webcomic, as we also get a full deep dive explanation into so much shit in this in this episode through Arthur's perspective, like whether it's learning of the world of Dethican, the structure of it, the difference between magic and ki, as well as the difference between augmenters and conjurers, like even learning like the heart of what magical power is in this world, and how it's called a mana core. Like this episode is doing a lot of heavy lifting, but it's also stuff that's important for setting the stage for Arthur's journey. And although I wasn't a big fan of the change to the prologue, one thing I did appreciate as well about this are little moments, are the little moments or two they added where they kind of interslice Arthur's past as Grey with his current life, and how it does kind of reinforce the point of Arthur's realization of never realizing what it means to feel parental love and affection. Like he never experienced that in his past life, but here he's so focused in on trying to get back to being who he was in this episode, that by the end he does realize that maybe he can finally let go and let a little parental affection in, you could say. So it's kind of just him learning to kind of readapt to the situation he's in, but in a way where it's like he realizes, yeah, I need to kind of let myself grow up a bit too, in order to maybe become better. Now, and one other thing though, but in saying that, and like I said, a lot of this is very front-loaded in a way, but I do also have to admit, one thing I never realized until watching this episode, nothing I never really realized from like reading the comic or even watching this episode is how even though it's very front-loaded, it's very streamlined. Like it's in context, it's a lot of exposition, but it's exposition in a way that doesn't feel as front-loaded as maybe it should be, which I never really thought about or appreciated, but it is kind of appreciative how Turtle Me and Fuyuki were able to make this make what is very heavy-handed exposition into very easy to digest dialogue, honestly, in a way. Another thing one final thing, and one thing I really appreciate about this episode, and something that carried over from the webcomic, is that with this episode adapting 3 chapters, we don't just get Arthur's perspective, or actually 4 chapters, never mind. We also get we not only get Arthur's perspective, but his mother's, Alice's perspective as well. More so her thoughts on raising him, which, looking back on a certain turning point in the series, it is interesting to look back on this moment and how much of of Alice's dialogue is Turtle Me basically foreshadowing what would eventually be revealed to her much later down the line. Like, regardless, like, here's the thing. Here's the one takeaway I want you guys to take away from this review. No matter how this adaptation turns out, I urge people to start reading this webcomic if you haven't already. Like, I know a lot of people are just gonna pass it off as a Mushoku Tensei clone, but the setup is very much like that. But if you give it's still worth a read. I'll say that much. But, yeah, guys, that's pretty much all I've got for this review. Like I said, this episode is definitely a little bit of a rough start. There are aspects and bits and pieces where I can see the potential, but it really needs, let me put it this way, episode 2 really, if I'm going to continue reviewing this, episode 2 really needs to impress me, honestly. But, yeah, well, I don't know. Like I said, we'll just have to wait and see. But, yeah, guys, that's all I got for this review. Enjoy the video, like, comment, subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, follow me on Blue Sky, NLS Crunchyroll, big share notification bell, hit the subscribe button, and just share the video around, guys. Dark Knight of Enemy, starting off. Later, everyone.